Why do you constantly feel at a disadvantage in the emotional game, even when you're sincere, engaged, and open? It's profoundly frustrating, isn't it? You offer your best, yet you end up dismissed, tested, or simply overlooked. The core issue is you're playing by the rules of logic on a field governed by emotion. This isn't about female malice. It's about a psychological framework that Friedrich Nietzsche understood with crystal clarity. Those who ignore human nature are destined to be manipulated by it. This isn't just a warning, it's a declaration of emotional war. Women aren't inherently cruel. They operate under ancestral codes, often invisible even to themselves. Nietzsche didn't disdain women out of misogyny. He saw with piercing insight what many men still refuse to acknowledge, that often women don't crave raw truth, but rather a sense of stability, even if that stability is built on carefully staged illusions. It's precisely this unconscious need to feel secure, desired, and in control that creates emotional patterns which, if misunderstood, can internally dismantle men. Grasping what might be perceived as female weaknesses isn't about manipulation, it's about emotional survival. It's about ceasing to be a victim of unseen cycles and becoming a strategist. You can't keep giving what she seems to want without understanding what she truly needs. You can't keep reacting to what she says without seeing the underlying meaning behind the gesture. This text won't turn you into a pickup artist, but into someone who finally comprehends the dynamics at play. We're going to unveil these hidden vulnerabilities, not to exploit them, but to protect yourself. From this moment on, the game shifts, and power begins with the one who sees first. The insatiable thirst for validation, a mirror of existence. There's a subtle detail most men completely miss. No matter how much she insists everything is fine, that she doesn't care about others' opinions, that she dresses solely for herself, or that she needs no external validation, watch closely. Every like she receives, every compliment disguised as an innocent comment, every approving gaze she catches in public activates an emotional circuit within her far deeper than it appears. Nietzsche identified this as the will to power, manifesting in its most primal form, a dependency on external recognition. A woman often perceives herself not as she is, but as she is perceived by others. She projects herself into the reflection of external eyes and seeks a sense of existence there. This isn't merely vanity, it's emotional survival. For millennia, women needed group acceptance to ensure protection. Rejection by the tribe was a death sentence. This ancestral fear still lives within them, no longer as wolves or exiles, but as social devaluation. This is why a friend's opinion often outweighs her own intuition. This is why a negative comment can destabilize her mood for an entire day. And this is why male silence can be interpreted as disdain. Nietzsche wrote that men seek meaning, but women seek reflection. And if you understand this quest, you stop offering empty reflections. You cease providing continuous approval because you realize that every drop of validation, given without effort, transforms into her emotional dependence on you. When your validation becomes scarce, something shifts. She begins to move, to try harder, to see you as a mirror of value, not as a free reflection. In this silent movement, an inversion of forces is born. The gaze that once judged you now seeks you, because your scarcity has become presence, and your presence, power. Drama as a vital necessity, the dance of chaos. There are moments when everything seems perfectly harmonious. The silence between you is light, conversations flow easily, glances meet naturally. But then, without warning, she withdraws, creates distance, initiates a conflict over something that seemed irrelevant. The rational man seeks logical explanations, tries to understand where he went wrong, resorts to dialogue as if attempting to solve an emotional equation. And this is where the abyss deepens. The error isn't in a lack of arguments, but in a misunderstanding of a vital principle. For many women, emotional peace isn't a paradise. It's a prison disguised as comfort. Nietzsche, observing the feminine soul, wrote that women are more emotionally combative than men, not because they enjoy chaos, but because intensity is, for them, a way of feeling alive. Calmness bores her, equilibrium silences her, The absence of highs and lows disconnects her from herself. She needs emotional flux as the body needs air, and in the absence of that movement she provokes it, not out of malice, but out of vital necessity. Drama, then, isn't an accident. It's the stage where she revives the sensation of being alive. And when a man tries to appease, correct, or flee the storm, he inadvertently extinguishes the lights of the performance she subconsciously needs to enact. The answer isn't in evasion, but in firm presence within the storm. When you master intensity without losing yourself in it, you become the eye of the hurricane. Instead of defending yourself or retreating, you hold your own strength without breaking. And it is there that she recognizes you, not as an adversary but as her anchor. Because a woman who tests emotionally isn't seeking submission. She's searching for an unwavering presence. The paradox of choice, intensity versus stability. It's not uncommon to see the intense man sidelined, while the more predictable, routine, almost monotonous fellow occupies the space seemingly meant for passion. The sting of being replaced by someone unremarkable is profound, but almost always misinterpreted. The error lies in assuming feminine selection follows the path of emotional intensity. In truth, something more subtle, almost tragic, guides this movement. Kierkegaard termed this the anguish of possibility, the existential vertigo that arises when confronting the unknown. And it's precisely this vertigo that for many women morphs into fear. She might desire the man who makes her laugh, who challenges her, who deeply excites her. She may feel alive by his side, fascinated by the intensity his presence offers. But when it comes to building, to envisioning stability, something within her screams for predictability. The very woman who secretly seeks adventure also seeks security as her chosen path. Intensity attracts her, but stability calms her. And between excitement and control, she often chooses the latter, not out of cowardice, but self-preservation. The intense man then grows frustrated, attempts to adapt, dampens his brilliance to fit the framework of predictability, but in doing so, he loses his essence and, paradoxically, also loses her desire. What attracted her fades. The answer isn't to compete with stability. It's to become the point of excitation within a solid structure, to be unpredictable without being unstable, to be free without being chaotic, to be passion without disorder. When a man learns to inhabit that paradox, he stops being a difficult choice and becomes an inevitable presence, not through the logic of security, but through the magnetism of balance between intensity and solidity. The invisible weapons, the silent war. Not every war is fought with shouts or direct confrontations. Many battles unfold in silence, amidst compliments and gestures that at first glance seem gentle, but carry disguised intentions. Nietzsche understood this art like few others. He observed that men attack with swords, but women with gestures. And in that realm of polite smiles and seemingly innocent phrases dwells one of the most sophisticated feminine vulnerabilities. Indirect manipulation, almost imperceptible yet profoundly effective. Competition among women rarely occurs in the visible arena. It is waged with invisible weapons, where a compliment can be poison and advice can be a trap. When a woman praises a friend's beauty, but then whispers that the dress doesn't flatter her figure, she isn't being kind. She's planting a seed of doubt. When she encourages another to approach a man, but first questions that woman's character, it isn't solidarity, it's strategy. And while this game seems restricted to the female world, it inevitably impacts the man at the center of these silent disputes. Manipulation in this context turns against him when he reacts to the surface, when he believes what he hears without perceiving what's insinuated between the lines, when he responds to what is said but ignores recurring patterns. The woman who masters this art doesn't shout, she hints. She doesn't forbid but guides. She doesn't accuse but plants uncertainties. And it's in this game that many men lose themselves, believing they're in control while already displaced from the center of their own narrative. True protection is born from refined perception, from seeing beyond the gesture, from hearing beyond the word, from realizing that often the battlefield isn't in what is said, but in what is implied. And in that silent war, power belongs to whoever doesn't react, but rather observes. The chemistry of attachment. The invisible bond. Not every physical connection is merely physical. A man often gives himself to the moment as one experiencing pleasure and presence, without necessarily creating bonds beyond the flesh. But a woman, even when she doesn't say it, even when she believes she's merely enjoying herself, experiences that instant with a different emotional structure. Nietzsche, in studying the most primitive human impulses, unveiled one of the keys most neglected by men, the projection of the eternal feminine. For a woman, a sexual partner isn't just a body. He often becomes the unconscious outline of everything she wishes to feel. During the climax of intimacy, the female brain releases oxytocin, an ancient hormone shaped to create bonds, to foster trust, to protect the connection that in earlier eras meant the survival of offspring. Even when she doesn't want a bond, her body creates it. And it's in this interval between momentary desire and chemical attachment that confusion arises. The man who before sex was free, detached, and available becomes, after the act, responsible for emotions he never promised to sustain. The problem emerges when he changes, when he abruptly distances himself, when he ceases to be what he was before. This rupture of consistency isn't merely read as rejection, it's interpreted as emotional betrayal. The woman feels, albeit silently, that something has been taken from her, and the distance transforms into a void, the silence in the pursuit, the void in the dramatic. The answer isn't in yielding to attachment, nor in distancing oneself to preserve freedom. It's in maintaining emotional coherence, in being clear beforehand, firm during, and whole afterward. The man who holds his ground even after intimacy doesn't fuel illusions. He sets boundaries. Within these limits, the woman recognizes something rare, a man who doesn't lie with his body, nor promise with his silence. Hypergamy, the instinct for selection. There are moments when a man wonders why, despite being loyal, present, and attentive, she chooses someone who was absent or indifferent. The answer isn't in kindness or dedication, but in the ancestral programming that shapes female desire. Nietzsche understood this through his concept of the will to power applied to sexual selection. Females choose a partner who offers the best signals of survival and ascendancy. That's why she ignores the one who stood by her in difficult times, but reapproaches when she perceives his social ascent. The man who was invisible yesterday becomes a possibility today simply because he began to shine in the eyes of others. This isn't about materialistic interest, but instinct, a deep impulse that responds to perceived scarcity. If he is desired, he is valuable. Most men respond by trying to compete. They want to prove they have more, are better, and deserve more attention. But in that arena, defeat is inevitable, as there will always be someone with more resources, status, or visibility. The key isn't in being the best at everything, but in being irreplaceable in something. Becoming a presence that isn't compared, measured, or replicated, a rare energy, a unique way of looking, touching, positioning oneself in the world. When other women recognize that value, she perceives it, and the instinct to lose what others desire activates in her the urgency of possession. Not because he begs for attention, but because he is desired without needing to claim it. And at that instant, the game changes hands. Control in disguise, the unseen prison. Sometimes control doesn't come in the form of imposition, shouting, or prohibitions. It comes disguised as care, as seemingly sweet phrases, as subtle questions that plant guilt without raising the voice. Nietzsche, in studying the invisible mechanisms of power, described this phenomenon as slave morality, a prison without bars, where the subject monitors himself even when no one is watching. This is how, in many relationships, the man begins to self-monitor, not because he was forbidden, but because he was conditioned to feel he always owes something. She says everything is fine, but her tone doesn't match the words. She claims she's not upset, but her eyes demand explanations that weren't asked for. Doubt settles in without direct confrontation, and the man, lost in that emotional fog, tries to adjust. He starts to review his own words, to hide small gestures, to avoid neutral actions that once seemed harmless. He lives in fear of triggering the next emotional storm, even when he did nothing wrong. And in that constant anticipation, he loses inner freedom. The error isn't in caring, but in justifying every step, as if every movement needed approval. The woman's strength in this game lies in shifting the axis of emotional responsibility. She doesn't state what she feels, but she makes him feel that he is responsible for it. And when he accepts that role, he surrenders his own center. True resistance begins when he rejects the burden of guilt that doesn't belong to him, when he answers a loaded question with another question, not to escape but to return emotional responsibility to its origin. Nietzsche said that where there is power, there is resistance. In the intimate sphere, that resistance isn't a fight, it's clarity. It's the presence of someone who doesn't bow to manipulation, even when it wears the mask of affection. The fear of emptiness, fleeing solitude. The haste with which some women change relationships isn't just about lack or passion. There's something deeper, more ancestral, driving that silent urgency. The fear of emptiness. Nietzsche observed that solitude for many women isn't merely the absence of company, but an existential threat. And so, often they prefer dysfunctional relationships to facing the mirror of their own silence. The end of a relationship, instead of being a space for regeneration, becomes merely a hurried bridge to the next bond, not out of genuine desire, but out of dread of nothingness. This behavior doesn't stem from malice, but from millennia of survival programming. For centuries, a woman alone faced real risks: abandonment, exclusion, social invisibility. That code remains active, even in times of financial independence. Solitude for many still sounds like danger. That's why she attaches quickly, returns to an ex after heartbreak, or tolerates emotional crumbs just to avoid confronting the silence of an empty room. The relationship then transforms into an anesthetic, not an encounter. The man perceiving this often believes he must fill that space. He becomes perpetually available, always present, always ready. But in that uninterrupted presence he loses value, ceases to be. Choice, evolving into an expectation. And what is guaranteed fails to ignite passion. What is certain cannot stir desire. Nietzsche observed that a man is truly himself only when he stands alone. In that solitary truth resides genuine strength. A woman unable to find peace in her own company seeks you out of apprehension. One who thrives in solitude chooses you with crystalline clarity. The distinction between being a sanctuary and a mere escape route begins with how you embrace your own aloneness. For those who master their inner void do not surrender themselves to just any presence, the awakening of consciousness, beyond resentment. This journey isn't about viewing women as adversaries, nor is it about engaging in perpetual conflict with the feminine spirit. It's about grasping that within every intimate connection, an intricate ballet of unseen forces unfolds. Unconscious desires, inherited fears, and subtle emotional strategies operate beneath the surface of rational thought. The man oblivious to these dynamics enters the arena unprepared. The one who acknowledges them, however, begins to forge a new mode of being, lucid, centered, and unyielding. Nietzsche famously stated that understanding the enemy's weaponry is already half the battle. In this context, the enemy isn't the woman, but rather the pervasive illusion. Every vulnerability revealed throughout this exploration doesn't signify malice, but rather deep-seated conditioning. The incessant quest for validation, the craving for emotional intensity, the conflict between passion and security, manipulation in disguise, emotional projection, post-intimacy, hypergamous selectivity, control masters affection, the terror of emptiness. These layers aren't conscious decisions. They are silent echoes of a self-perpetuating system. And the man who yearns for liberation must first perceive the invisible net that ensnares him. Nietzsche warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." The path isn't to recoil with cynicism, nor to return pain with detached indifference. The true way is to observe, to comprehend, and to strategically reposition oneself, not to dominate through fear, but to inhabit one's own intrinsic sovereignty. Power emerges from clarity, and clarity from the courage to acknowledge what has always been overtly present, yet few dare to articulate. The authentic Nietzschean will to power seeks not to subjugate another, but to master oneself. It doesn't pursue vengeance, but profound understanding. It doesn't crave control, but ultimate freedom. In this awakening of awareness, the man ceases to be a casualty of unconscious patterns and transforms into the architect of his own emotional destiny. He no longer merely reacts, but thoughtfully responds. He no longer simply defends, but deliberately positions himself. He no longer seeks approval, but radiates an undeniable presence. And in this quiet metamorphosis, something profoundly shifts within the relational dynamic. The woman, accustomed to interacting with men, whose reactions are often predictable, encounters a presence that cannot be manipulated, that does not get entangled in drama, and that never begs for validation. A presence that understands without passing judgment, that sees without resentment, that acts without merely reacting. This is the genuine emotional revolution, not a skirmish between genders, but an evolution of masculine consciousness towards a more elevated way of existing in the world. A presence unafraid of solitude, independent of external approval, and impervious to the emotional games of others. May your mind remain sharp, may truth continue to be your blade, and may wisdom be your shield in this timeless dance of human power and comprehension.